if you look online, there are a lot of videos about how to make a gesture, and most of them are based on gesturing figures, right? Figure drawing and gesture really go hand in hand. But gesture is something that is really important for any kind of drawing. The main thing is staying loose and making several marks to try to figure out what are the right marks. In other words, you're searching on the page for where the forms are, how big they should be, what their proportions are, how tall is this to how wide is this, where is this in relation to that, what's the space between this and that. All of these bigger picture things we're establishing with gesture. Now, before I start, you have a range of pencils, and they are rated from H to B. Right in the middle of that range is an HB pencil. So if we think about this like positive and negative numbers, the HB is the 0. And then as we go towards one side of the scale with H, so from an HB to 2H to 4H to 6H, the higher the number in H, the harder the graphite, the lighter the mark, right? You can only get so dark with a H pencil. And as we go on the B side, from HB to 2B, 4B, 6B, 8B, etc., the higher the number in B, the softer the graphite, so the darker the mark. So if I take a 2H pencil, okay, like this, and I make as light a mark as possible, and I also make as dark a mark as possible, and compare that to, say, a 2B. Here's as light a mark as I can make with a 2B. You can see it's darker than the 2H. And then as I press as hard as I can with a 2B, you can see that 2H can't get nearly as dark. Let's put a little more light on the situation. Make it a little easier to see. So that's what your range of pencils are. You have one other extra pencil I've asked you to get. Well, two other really. There's a red pencil, and I'll talk about that in just a bit. And then you have either an ebony pencil by Prismacolor, or you have a General's Layout pencil. Now this is kind of a special pencil. It's a little thicker than the other pencils in diameter, a little wider, and it's also significantly darker. So as I press lightly with that pencil, it's kind of similar to the 2B in that respect. But then as I press as hard as I possibly can press, you can see it gets significantly darker. It's kind of a special mixture of graphite and perhaps charcoal or some other material that makes it really dark. So this is a great general pencil to use, and one for making really dark marks. One thing you may have noticed is some of my pencils have been sharpened in such a way that there's a lot more graphite sticking out. I don't think the camera is focusing on this very well, but I think you can see that still pretty easily. And so the way that I do this is to hold the pencil with one hand and the knife with the other, and then use both hands to sharpen. So I'm pushing the blade with my thumb to expose more of the graphite. You can do this with any kind of pencil. And then that gives you the possibility of working with the side of the pencil to make marks as much as the point. The red pencil we're going to start using next week. And what it does is a real material difference from graphite, right? And so we can use the red pencil to establish our forms on the paper, where they are, how big they are. In other words, they do kind of what I talked about a gesture does, and then we can use our graphite to define that more on top. Okay. And if I want to really refine it, then I change my grip, right? And I would start to refine what line is the correct line of the multiple lines that I made. And in fact, that's what gesture does, is it allows you, as I said, to think out loud on the page, making multiple marks. Our grip is also different into gesture. So when we draw, we're typically drawing like we may write. But when we're gesturing, we want to not choke up on the end like when we're writing, but we want to hold the pencil on this end. And we want to hold the pencil a little more loosely like this. So instead of having a kind of a tight grip on it, I want to have a more relaxed grip on it. And I want it kind of held by most of my fingers instead of just these three real tightly. Okay. You can also make modifications on that grip. You might have it between your fingers on the end, so you're holding more of the pencil itself. Either of those kinds of grips are acceptable. You can gesture like this too. It's just harder to do that, right? With gesture, we're trying to use movements of our arm and our elbow versus the wrist, right? So when I gesture, again, I want to hold the pencil much more loosely and out towards the far end. Okay. Now, what to gesture? We can gesture anything, right? I'm going to start with an unusual pose of my hand. And to start a gesture, or really the purpose of a gesture, is to describe the bigger picture. How big is this? Where is this? At what angle do I see parts of it? Does it have a sense of movement or direction to it? All of those kind of bigger picture issues. So there's lots of ways to do this. One of which might be thinking about this as maybe simple shapes first. I'll make this a little darker so you can see. Typically I'm drawing kind of lightly, right? And I'm gradually trying to define this with a bit more detail. So I might start with something like that, a really simple shape. Or I might start with something kind of more organic where I'm building it with little shapes. And I'm taking kind of the parts that I see and working something like that. Now this is the beginning of a gesture, right? Gestures are usually pretty quickly done, within maybe 3 minutes to 5 minutes perhaps. Just depends on the complexity of what's being drawn. But one thing you see that I'm doing is I'm keeping my pencil moving, right? It's not aimless scribbling, although in the beginning it may feel like that. Right? What you're trying to do is, again, look at the world as a series of shapes. Right? The minute I think, oh, I'm drawing my thumb or my finger, then that information doesn't really help me at all in drawing. Labeling things is another part of your brain. We want to use the part of our brain that helps us see shapes. So I'm using this kind of searching technique with my pencil to help establish forms as I see them.